everyone. I am recording this video Saturday, March 12th, 3:52-ish p.m. I probably am going to post it the next day though on Saturday, March 13th, Sunday, March 13th, because I already posted one this morning, so I just kind of want to space them out a little. So I'm recording it on Saturday. It'll probably be posted on Sunday. And I just want to start off by saying my Lent has taken a very unexpected turn down this weird rabbit hole of French monarchies. And so I didn't have many plans for my Lent season. Usually I have some devotions plans out and things like that. My main goal was to stop complaining, but really I kind of gave it to God. Like I kind of just said it, as an act of trust, because trusting in Jesus is something I'm continually working on. And I kind of just threw myself out there like, you take the lead, Lord. I want you to lead me during this Lenten season. And I have just found in this last week the most amazing stuff, the most amazing research that I am compiling and writing down, and maybe I'll try to put it in book form, because it's just so many things that I feel like were stolen, definitely from my generation, before my generation, just for generations and generations of public schooling and whatever. Just all this amazing, deep information about who we are, about where we come from, has been stolen from us. And I think really what happened was God probably gave this task of leading me through my Lenten season to my patron saint of Saint Joan of Arc, because it's all kind of branching out from her and what I know about her. And so it's just been fascinating, the stuff I have come to find out. And without complaining, because I'm not supposed to be complaining, I do want to say that stuff we learned in public school is such a far cry from being able to help anyone grow as a person, that until you are able to actually look at history and look at the state of the world and make these connections, you can't see how brainwashed you actually are. And I'm sure there are certain things that I'm still brainwashed with. I don't know. Hopefully those will be brought to my attention and I can correct the error of my ways before I leave this earth. But it's really obvious to me at this point that this has been a horrible, horrible generational conspiracy to dumb down and cut off the people of Christendom from the history and beauty of Christendom. And Christendom in a lot of ways has been demonized in the public school system. So I really had the odds stacked against me. Not only did I live in a liberal blue state and attend public school, I didn't have any catechesis as far as that went. As far as church catechesis goes, not that I don't even know that at this point it would have made a difference. And I don't even know that at this point, if I lived in a conservative state, that it would make a difference, because even the more conservatively minded states have a very Protestant view, a very anti-monarch view of the world. Why? Well, that's a long story that I'm not getting into on this video. But just the things I've come to learn and discover about what the public school deems the dark ages. And we were apparently, this is the story I got in school, we were apparently redeemed and pulled out of the dark ages by the Enlightenment and the age of reason. And it just seems to all be falling apart. So we might want to rethink that. Man, oh man. And I just feel like maybe we should have at least been given both sides of the story, but we weren't. Why? It's because they are scared to tell us the full truth. Because once people get a hold of the full truth, they lose their power. The democracies and the republics, and it loses their power because it doesn't hold a flame. It doesn't, it just, what's the saying? It doesn't hold a flame to the truth, whatever. So fascinating stuff. I found myself, and I feel like the more I'm writing this stuff out and making my own reflections and my own connections, the more stuff is just being thrown on my lap. And I haven't bought one book, but for example, last week I went on to check the status of the returned items on my library account or something like that. And also I did want to look up a book about Joan of Arc. So I typed in Joan of Arc into the search engine to see which library around me had books about her. And I came across the fact that our library system uses something, I don't know, it's like a digital database of books, and you can download these ebooks right to your computer without having to go to the library for free. And they had different books, so I was able to find all these awesome books on there. And I've just been nerding out. I've really been nerding out, and it's amazing because I can see I nerd out and I learn about Christendom, and then I look out into the world and what's happening, and it's just all so connected. It's profound. This Lent so far has been absolutely profound and unexpected for me. And so I want to read about something I came across that, again, you're not going to learn about in public school. So if you already know this, awesome. But I did not know any of this, so please excuse my ignorance. And it's this book I came across called Knights and Their Days by a Dr. John Doran. In the description, you can find this on Amazon, but the description of this book is somewhat mysterious. So it says, this is a reproduction of a book published before 1923. This book may have occasional imperfections, such as missing or blurred pages, poor pictures, errant marks, etc., that were either part of the original artifact or were introduced by the scanning process. We believe this work is culturally important, and despite the imperfections, have elected to bring it back into print as part of our continuing commitment to the preservation of printed works worldwide. We appreciate your understanding. And that's the whole weird description. So anyway, I want to read a specific chapter from it to you because it's fascinating. And I'll give my comments on it maybe a little bit as we go of some of the connections that I've seen. And it's just the same storyline that is just being thrown at me over and over throughout anything I try to research. And it's really the fact that it was these secret societies, these Masons, that put the nail in the coffins of Christendom. And it's just unavoidable to come to this conclusion when you start doing any amount of research. So here we go. This is called, the chapter in this book, so the book, like I said, is Knights and Their Days. And the specific chapter, search on page 201, it's called The Knights of the Sante Ampule. And excuse me if I mess up on the words and pronunciations because it's kind of in an old English, but I'll try my best. There have been knights who, like special constables, have been created merely for the nonce, and who have been as ephemeral as the short-lived flies so called. This was especially the case with the Knights of the Holy Ampoule, or anointing oil, used at the coronation of the kings of France. And so another thing I want to say is not only is it the public schools that totally demonize and give a wrong view of monarchies, a biased view without giving the whole truth. It's also these weird Netflix series, Netflix and all these streaming devices seem to, at least for a while, and even before that, because I remember when I was in high school, my ex-stepmother would watch these weird series that she was obsessed with, Anne Boleyn and all this weird stuff. But it was always the same storyline. It was always this struggle of the monarchs and all the corruption and things like that and all their drama. And it always painted the Protestant king, Queen Elizabeth or whoever, in a more positive light, and the Catholic monarchs, kings and queens, as only being powerful because they were corrupt and the church was corrupt and all this stuff. And listen, yeah, human institutions get corrupt. That's the nature of original sin. That's just what it is. There will never be a perfect human institution on earth. Never. But they always seem to leave out the good details of why these people felt that they were divinely inspired or divinely appointed. They always seem to leave that out. So I'm glad I'm finally able to see both sides and maybe just, bring some light into the darkness of the brainwashing that has been my generation and then previous generations. I mean, this has been going on. Man, I don't. All right. So anyway, let's not stop. So the oil was said to have been brought to Saint Remigius by a dove from heaven, and to have been placed by the great converter of Clovis in his own tomb, where it was found by miraculous process. Saint Remy himself never alluded either to the oil or the story connected with it. 4 centuries after the saint's death, the matter was first spoken, nay, the oil was boldly distilled by Hincmar, Archbishop of Reims. This archiepiscopal biographer of Saint Remy has inserted wonders in the saint's life, which staggered while they amused the readers who were able to peruse his work by fireside in castle hall or convent refectory. I can only allude to one of these wonders, namely the Sante ampulle. Hincmar actually asserted that when Saint Remy was about to consecrate with oil the humbled King Clovis at his coronation, and if you don't know who King Clovis is, brief history lesson, he was a pagan king in charge of Gaul. He married a devout Catholic woman who was a Burgundian, modern-day France, princess who worked tirelessly to convert him, to which he did convert. So he was from the Frankish Germanic tribe, first king, and so he was the first Christian monarch of France. That's his significance. So at his coronation, a dove descended from heaven and placed in his hands a small, this is talking about Saint Remy. So Saint Remy was about to consecrate with oil the humbled King Clovis. At his coronation, a dove descended from heaven and placed in his hands a small vial of holy oil. Hincmar defied any man to prove the contrary, as he further declared that the vial of oil was still to be found in the saint's sepulchre, and as it was so found, accordingly, Hincmar was allowed to have proved his case. Thenceforward, the chevaliers of the Saint Ampulle, sorry about that, rudely interrupted. So the vial of oil was still to be found in the saint's sepulchre, and as it was so found, accordingly, Hincmar was allowed to have proved his case. Thenceforward, the chevaliers of the Saint Ampulle were created for a day. So for one day, this order of knights was created, that of the crowning of the sovereigns. So, sorry, it's a little hard to... The chevaliers of the Saint Ampulle were created for a day, that of the crowning of the sovereign. They had charge of the vial, delivered it to the archbishop, and saw it restored to its repository. And therewith the coronation and their knightly character concluded together. From that time down to the period of Louis the XV1, which is the 16th, the knights and the vial formed the most distinguished portion of the coronation procession and doings at the crowning of the kings of France. Then ensued the revolution. So back up. So this holy miraculous bomb was used in the coronation of all the French monarchs, all the French kings, and queens. I think they're coronated. See, I don't know. Excuse my ignorance. Okay, so there was a ritual involved in this, and it was a Catholic ritual, and this oil allegedly was given to a now saint who was a bishop from heaven as God's sign of, this is who I place my authority on earth with, sort of thing. Then ensued the revolution, and the revolution they're referring to is the French Revolution. And as that mighty engine never touched anything without smashing it, you may be sure that the vial of Saint Remy hardly escaped destruction. On the 6th of October, 1793, Citizen Rolle entered the modest apartment of Philippe Herrelli, chief margulare of the Cathedral of Reims. Pause button. Cathedral of Reims, aka the Cathedral of Notre Dame. Notre Dame, whatever you want to say, Notre Dame. The importance of this, we need to get into this. This is extraordinarily important. The importance of the Cathedral of Reims or Notre Dame was that that's where all the coronations of the divinely appointed French monarchs took place because of this miracle of the holy oil situation. And so the oil was kept there. The oil was, so all the rituals, all the coronations were done there, dating back to, because of this miracle with Clovis, the pagan king who converted to Christianity. And so when you see things like we saw several years ago of Notre Dame, oh, one more thing I want to add. Do you know what else is housed in that very cathedral? The crown of thorns. I think the whole thing, maybe it's just part of it, but I do know the relic of the crown of thorns is housed there. Because what? That was Jesus's earthly crown, right? So you see this whole parallel. It's amazing. And through his crown of thorns, these French monarchs were able to be crowned with gold. Do you see the redemption through the Lord, the original King Jesus Christ, how it works? And so when we see things like a couple years ago with Notre Dame catching on fire mysteriously, and a large part of it being burned, and thankfully things were rescued like the crown of thorns, it kind of makes you wonder if that's not a warning. Kind of makes you wonder if that's not like, hey, we might need a course correction. Let's draw attention to this destruction of what once was understood to be the place of royalty, of crowning royalty, of crowning earthly authority. Furthermore, there's some horrible things that were proposed that they wanted to do to Notre Dame in order to, I guess, modernize it and make it more universal to the world. And they wanted to have different areas of the world represented. And it's just what it is this whole, it's a big Masonic FU is what it is. Why? Because in order for these republics to arise, which, make no mistake about it, the next step is this global governing system, they had to get the monarchs out of the way. So how did they get the monarchs out of the way? How did the Masons, who wanted to rule the world, get the monarchs out of the way? By convincing the people that they were oppressed and that they wanted republics and wanted democracies. But that was nothing more than a ploy. That was nothing more than a ploy just to get the monarchs out of the way so the New World Order Masons could swoop in and take everything over. And that's exactly where we are right now. So, then ensued the revolution. Okay, we read that. On the 6th of October, 1793, Citizen Roll entered the modest apartment of Felipe Harelli, chief margulier of the Cathedral of Reims, a.k.a. Notre Dame, and without ceremony demanded that surrender should be made to him of the old glass bottle of the ci devant Remy. Felipe's wig raised itself with horror, but as Citizen Roll told him that it would be as easy to lift his head from his shoulders as his wig from his head if he did not obey, the margulier stammered out an assertion that the rectory was in the keeping of the curé M. Serain, to whom he would make instant application. Bring pomatum and all, said Citizen Roll, who thus profanely misnamed the sacred balm or thickened oil which had anointed the head and loins of so many kings from Charles the Bald downward. May I ask, said Felipe timidly, what you will do therewith? Grease your neck that the knife may slip the easier through it unless you bring it within a decade of minutes. Too much honor by half, exclaimed Felipe. I will slip to the curé as rapidly as if I slid the whole way on the precious ointment itself. Meanwhile, here is a bottle of Burgundy, which I shall have finished within the time specified. So dispatch and let us have the other bottle too. When Felipe Harelli had communicated the request to the curé, Monsignor Serene, with a quickness of thought that did justice to his imagination, exclaimed, "We will take the rogues in and give them a false article for the real one." But the time was so short. There was no second ancient-looking vial at hand. There was not a pinch of pomatum nor a spoonful of oil in the house, and the curé confessed with a sigh that the genuine relic must needs be surrendered. "But we can save some of it," cried M. Serene, "and here is the vial. Give me the consecrating spoon." And with the handle of the spoon, having extracted some small portions, which the curé subsequently wrapped up carefully and rather illegibly labeled, the vial was delivered to Felipe, who surrendered it to Citizen Rull, who carried the same to the front of the finest cathedral in France, and at the foot of the statue of Louis XV, Citizen Rull solemnly hammered the vial into powder, and in the name of the Republic trod the precious ointment underfoot, till it was not to be distinguished from the mud with which it was mingled. And so, this is important, and so do we put an end to princes and pomatum, cried he. Felipe coughed evasively, smiled as if he was the same way of thinking with the Republic, and exclaimed, very mentally indeed, "Vivent les princes et la pommade." Neither he felt assured was irrevocably destroyed. The time indeed did come round again for princes, and Napoleon was to be crowned at Notre Dame. He cared little as to what became of the heaven-descended ointment, and he might have anointed as well as crowned himself. There were some dozen gentlemen who hoped that excuse might be discovered for creating the usual order of the Knights of the Ampoule, but the emperor did not care a fig for knights or ointment, and to the horror of all who hoped to be chevaliers, the imperial coronation was celebrated without either. But then Napoleon was discrowned, as was to be expected from such profanity, and therewith returned the Bourbons, who, having forgotten nothing, bethought themselves of the Saint Ampoule. Monsignor de Chevreuse, magistrate at Reims, set about the double work of discovery and recovery. For some time he was unsuccessful. At length, in early 1819, the three sons of the late Felipe Harelli waited on him. They made oath that not only were they aware of a portion of the sacred ointment having been kept of their late father, but that his widow succeeded to the inheritance, and that she reckoned it as among her choicest treasures. "She has nothing to do but to make it over to me," said Monsignor Chevreuse. "She will be accounted of it in history as the mother of the Knights of the Saint Ampoule of the Restoration." "It is vexatious," said the eldest son, "but the treasure has been lost. At the time of the invasion, our house was plundered, and the relic was the first thing the enemy laid his hands on. The disappointment that ensued was only temporary. A judge named Lecomte, soon appeared, who made oath that he had it in his keeping a certain portion of what had first been consigned to the widow Harelli. The portion was so small that it required an eye of faith very acute and ready indeed to discern it. The authorities looked upon the relic and thought, if Louis the XVI 111, so 15, 16, 17, 18, Louis the 18th could not be crowned till a sufficient quantity of the holy ointment was recovered wherewith to anoint him, the coronation was not likely to be celebrated yet a while. Then arose a crowd of priests, monks, and ex-monks, all of whom declared that the curé M. Serene had imparted to them the secret of his having preserved a portion, of the dried anointing oil, but they were unable to say where he had deposited it. Some months of hesitation ensued when in summer M. Bore, a priest of Bere Ba, came forward and proclaimed that he was the depository of the long-lost relic, and that he had preserved it in a portion of the winding sheet of St. Remy himself. A week later, I lost my spot. A week later, M. Champagne Provostian appeared and made deposition to the following effect. He was standing near Rull when the latter, in October 1793, destroyed the vial, which had been brought from heaven by a dove at the foot of the statue of Louis XV. When the Republicans struck the vial, some fragments of the glass flew onto the coat sleeve of the said M. Champagne. These he dexterously preserved, took home with him, and now produced in court. A commission examined the various relics and the fragments of glass. The whole was pronounced genuine, and the chairman thought that by process of putting that and that together, there was enough of legend, vial, and ointment to legitimately anoint and satisfy any Christian king. There was nothing now to obstruct your majesty's coronation, said his valet to him one morning, after having spent 3 hours in a service for which he hoped to be appointed one of the knights of the Saint Ampoule. There was now absolutely nothing to prevent that august ceremony. Allons done, said Louis the, 16th, 18th, with the laugh of incredulity, that shrug of the shoulders, and that good-humored impatience at legends and absurdities which made the priest speak of him as an infidel. What shall be done with the ointment, said the knight expectant. Lock it up in the vestry cupboard and say no more about it. And this was done with some ceremony and a feeling of disappointment. The gathered relics, placed in a silver reliquary lined with white silk and enclosed in a metal case under 3 locks, were deposited within the tomb of St. Remy. There it remained till Charles X was solemnly crowned in 1825. In that year, positively for the last time, the Knights of the Sante Ampoule were solemnly created and did their office. As soon as Charles entered the choir, he knelt in front of the altar. On rising, he was led into the centre of the sanctuary, where a throne chair received his august person. A splendid group half encircled him, and then approached the Knights of the Sante Ampoule in grand procession, bearing all that was left of what the sacred dove did or did not bring to St. Remy for the anointing of Clovis. Not less than 3 prelates, an archbishop, and 2 bishops received the ointment from the hands of the knights and carried it to the high altar. Their excellences and eminences may be said to have performed their office with unction, but the people laughed alike at the knights, the pomatum, and the ceremony, all of which combined could not endow Charles X with sense enough to keep his place. The Knights of the Sante Ampoule may be said now to have lost their occupation forever. All of the memorabilia of Reims, the good people there, dwelt upon none more strongly than the old and splendid procession of these Knights of the Sante Ampoule. The coronation cortege seemed only a subordinate point of the proceedings, and the magnificent canopy upheld by the knights over the vial on its way from the Abbey of St. Remy to the cathedral excited as much attention as the king's crown. The proceedings, however, were not always of a peaceable character. The Grand Prior of St. Remy was always the bearer of the vial in its case or shrine. It hung from his neck by a golden chain. Always the bearer, is that what I said? Of the vial in its case or shrine. It hung from his neck by a golden chain, and he himself was mounted on a white horse. Interesting. On placing the vial in the hands of the archbishop, the latter pledged himself by solemn oath to restore it at the conclusion of the ceremony, and some 6 barons were given as hostages by way of security. The procession back to the abbey through the gaily tapestried streets was of equal splendor with that to the cathedral. The horse on which the Grand Prior was mounted was furnished by the government, but the prior claimed it as the property of the abbey as soon as he returned thither. This claim was disputed by the inhabitants of Chien-la-Popule, or as it is vulgarly called, Chien-la, I don't know. They founded their claim upon a privilege granted to their ancestors. It appeared that in the olden time, the English had taken Rheims, plundered the city, and rifled the tomb of Saint Remy, from which they carried off the Saint Sante en Poulet. The inhabitants of Chien, however, had fallen upon the invaders and recovered the inestimable treasure. From that time, and in memory, in acknowledgement of the deed, they had enjoyed, as they said, the right to walk in the procession with the knights of the Sante en Poulet, and had been permitted to claim the horse ridden by the Grand Prior. The prior and his people called these claimants scurvy knaves and would by no means attach any credit to the story. At the coronation of Louis XVIII, they did not scruple to support their claim by violence. They pulled the prior from his horse, terribly thrashed the monks who came to his assistance, tore the canopy to pieces, thwacked the knights right lustily, and carried off the steed in triumph. The respective parties immediately went to law and spent the value of a dozen steeds in disputes about the possession of a single horse. The contest was decided in favor of the religious community, and the turbulent people of Chien were compelled to lead the quadruped back to the abbey stables. They renewed their old claim subsequently and again threatened violence, much to the delight of the attorneys who thought to make money by the dissension. At the coronation of Louis XV and Louis XVI, these sovereigns issued special decrees whereby the people of Chien were prohibited from pretending to any property in the horse and from supporting any such pretensions by acts of violence. The history of foreign orders would require a volume as large as Anstice's, but though I cannot include such a history among my gossiping details, I may mention a few curious incidents connected with. And then he goes on. But anyway, so the moral of my story, I guess, was just to point out that there's just so much more than modern culture is willing to reveal to us. And the church has done a poor job, for the most part, of bringing this into the public understanding. And I guess it's because it's a lack of, it's a courage thing. I think most of the people that know this stuff are scared to go against the grain, are scared to, speak out against democracy and republics and communism or whatever the flavor of the day is that is running the world. But our history is so rich and so deep that it's a shame that the average Catholic does not even know it. So I'll leave that here at 33 minutes and 44 seconds, and hope y'all have a great day. Joan of Arc, media out.